Hi, I am Dr. Irene Kende, the head dietitian and Sir H. N. Reliance Foundation Hospital. My core interest is in critical care nutrition and transplant nutrition. And today we are here gathered with a very esteemed panelist and the study which is conducted by none other than Harita. Now, this study is on high calorie, high protein medical nutrition therapy that is used in critical care nutrition and on patients in the ICU. It is a pilot study, and our principal investigator, Harita from Hyderabad Apollo Hospital, is going to speak to us in detail of what she did. To accompany her, we also have two other guests who are none other than Ipshita from CK Birla Hospital, Kolkata, and we have from the Max Hospital, New Delhi, Ritika. So these all are with me today with over 30 years of experience, and they're going to talk to us on critical care nutrition. So let's have fun and let's learn from each other. Coming to you, Ritika, and to Harita and Ipshita, welcome to this show. And today we're going to talk on something that's so exciting. So, first of all, with our principal investigator, Harita, let me ask you a little details of what this study is about and how did you conduct it and how did you choose this population to study?
So the whole idea of doing this study was to understand what is the impact of the nutrition that we give in critical care, specifically in a population where there are many challenges. We have, in terms of in a critical care patient, normally we face these challenges of getting lower volumes, calorie demands are high, protein demands are high. They might be staying in the ICU for a longer period of time. How do you manage the nutrition and the nutrition that we give, whether it is effective or not? That was the whole thought process of doing this small pilot study.
Very nice. Uh, Ritika, I just wanted to understand from you about the calorie density feeds. What is your take on how we should go about with feeding the patients in the ICU in terms of calorie density?
Yeah. So, first we have to understand the kind of profile we get in the ICU. So, we usually have two types of patients who walk into the ICU. One is, of course, who are already malnourished, and we know by data that almost 1/3 of the population which enters into the ICU is already malnourished at the time of admission. We have elderly population, we have chronic disease patients who walk into the ICUs. Now, these kind of patients are already malnourished, and the requirement in terms of calories and proteins are very good. On the other hand, we also have another segment of population which is probably absolutely healthy, probably with an RTA or probably with a glioblastoma surgery which is being planned the next day. So they come into the ICU with they're absolutely nourished, but over a period of time, because of the elongated stay in the ICU, they actually become malnourished. So therefore, the requirement of a calorie dense and a protein dense formulations are very, very important, especially when we are talking about the ICU setups.
Exactly. Coming on to this point of van nutrition, it's really surprising that so many patients in our ICU are malnourished. Uh, Tell me one thing, Harita. In your study, how many patients did you take and how much of malnourishment did you find in your patients?
So what we have seen is it's a small study, it's a pilot study. We had about 30 patients, and about 13% of the patients were severely malnourished. And that's exactly what Ritika is also saying, that while 1/3 of the patients already come in malnourished, but there is a good population who is well nourished. About 45%, 46% of them were well nourished to begin with. But what happens is if they stay longer in the hospital, if they are really catabolic and they have multi-organ dysfunction, then they tend to become malnourished over a period of time. We also know that as the catabolism increases, the protein synthesis decreases, there is a significant amount of weight loss that we see, especially muscle loss. About half a kg to 1 kg muscle loss is what we can see in these patients if they are not monitored nutritionally, or right kind and right time of nutritional intervention does not happen. So we used the simple SGA nutritional assessment tool basically to assess them. And to look at it, initially it felt like a very small population were malnourished. But as we all know, if we don't monitor them, a good significant amount of them could be nutritionally at risk and then can become severely malnourished over a period of time.
Ipshita, we know that when we are in the ICU and we are, actually planning a feed for the patient, and we want to give very high amount of calories and high proteins, but at the same time, we know that the patient is fluid restriction and we have very little amount of fluid. So, does that also affect the kind of supplement or the kind of enteral nutrition that you are looking at? So, are you looking at what kind of formulas that you would use in your enteral nutrition?
Thank you, Eileen, for the question. Basically, in ICU, we need to have the patient to be hemodynamically stable, that a doctor or ICU registrar or a clinical intensivist, critical care intensivist, so to say, they are going to decide that this particular patient can be fed. The feeding can be started. Accordingly, we need to choose the product. Patient can have ARDS, patient can have edema, patient can be having CKD or AKI, some fluid overload can be there. So their patient is fluid compromised. So we need to get a very lesser amount of fluid through which we need to give a maximum amount of protein and calorie which should reach the patient. So to start with, we need to focus on the polymeric formula which is in guidelines. So we are focusing on that. But at the same time, while choosing the formula, we need to choose that kind of formula where lesser amount of volume, lesser amount of fluid is required for the dilution. So that particular product we are choosing to get the maximum outcome from the minimum usage of that product.
Excellent strategy, I must say, that you are trying to use in lesser volume that you have. You're trying to maximize the calories and the proteins, which is a superb strategy. And you also spoke about the guidelines which said that, okay, we start with the standard polymeric formula first. Coming to you, Ritika, when do you think you should be shifting from a standard polymeric formula, which is the guidelines, to any other kind of formulas, or maybe disease-specific formula or something else?
So, as rightly said by Ipshita, so we actually start with the polymeric, but depending upon the kind of disease the patient has, we might have to change or modify the formulation which is being given to the patient. Now, ideally, we have these calorie-dense formulas which are available. Now, what is it? We nearly need to understand. These basically means that they're very high on calorie per ml, which is generally about 1.5 to 2 kilocalories per ml. So, in a very small amount of volume, you are able to meet your calorie requirements very, very easily. So, certain disease conditions, like Ipshita also mentioned, we had your ARDS, we have cirrhosis with ascites, we have certain trauma conditions like sepsis, burns, where the requirements of calories are very, very high. And mostly we find it very, very difficult in the ICU setup to meet our target requirements of calorie proteins. And that's the time when we have, as dietitians, we have to take a decision that this is the time we really need to change from a standard polymeric feed to probably a Kamtetsky.
Excellent strategy, I must say. Coming back to, the same aspect of the pilot study that, Harita was doing. And whilst she said that we are trying to give in very low volume, high calorie, high protein, Harita, what happens to the intolerances? What happens to osmolality? How did you manage all these in your pilot study?
I think whenever we are treating a patient in ICU, one thing which should remain and does remain at the back of our mind is, whether the patient will tolerate what I am suggesting to the patient. So in most ICU patients, we give very good intervention plans. We have a good care plan. We start with the intervention, and we want to quickly escalate, start early and quickly escalate by day 3, day 5. To the goal calories, at least to 80%. We want to reach 80-85% of the goal calories. But if the patient does not tolerate, we are totally defeated in our purpose. And therefore, we want to be very careful in our selections. And classically, as both my co-speakers have said, we want to start isocaloric, we want to go slow, and we want to reach our goal calories maybe by day 3 and 5. The patient is stable and tolerating the foods very well. However, often when we stick to isocaloric feeds or polymeric feeds, we see that we are unable to reach the goal calories simply because of the fluid restrictions that are most commonly seen as Ritika has described them. And therefore, the challenge in majority of the ICU patients is about lesser volumes, and within the lesser volumes, try and reach the intervention plan that you have designed. And in such scenarios, we do use a lot of high calorie, high protein supplementations. When we use them, yes, we are worried about whether the osmolarity will be high, whether we are going to the feed induced intolerances will come up or not. Well, the most common intolerances that we see are about diarrhea, constipation, bloating, heaviness, tightness. And the first person that the physician will call on definitely is the dietitian. Or they may already dictate and say that this is caused because of the feed, and therefore the feed needs to be changed. Though we are going to reach our calorie and protein goals by using such calorie dense formulas, if intolerances creep in, then we are defeating the whole purpose. So in the study, when we observed, we saw that about 50% of the patients that had some level or any one of these intolerances, but we could gradually over a period of time ensure that these are ironed out by the various mechanisms that we have, and we could graduate from 900 calories on day 1 to about 1300 1400 by day 3 and 5, and by day 6 and 10 we actually could reach the around 1600 1800 calories, which was about 85% of the total calorie requirement. And then these patients stay longer, and we are able to help them sustain these intakes as well. So yes, in today's scenario, even though there are fluid restrictions, we see that we are able to manage the nutritional requirements and ensure that the nutritional status of the patient does not deteriorate during their ICU stay.
Lovely strategy. Go slow, go steady, increase gradually. So you, Ipshita, if you have to go slow, tell me one thing. How do you modify or, modify the rates, and how do you give? Because you may not be able to achieve your entire total target if you're really slow. So how do you adjust the feed and the flow rates?
If I increase the content of the product, or I mean the protein and calorie in a total full strength, I should say. So there we need to have this slow flow rate. Automatically, that is the science. But in our setup, as I can say, mostly this feeding pump is used. So few challenges are there because patient is getting out of ventilator, so patient is extubated, patient is NPM for USG or CT scan or MRI. So these are the concerns. Patient is kept NPM for maybe NPM for more than 4 hours, 6 hours, depending on what needs to be done. So there, that particular hours, patient is kept NPM, and that should be, I'm saying should be, because some nocturnal feeding policy should be there where the patient should be fed whatever is being the deficit. Because suppose I am supposed to get 1500 today and I am losing out on 500 calorie for that NPM hours. So that should not be added for the next day. It cannot be 2000 for the next day. So it has to be within the 24 hours. So we need to use a nocturnal feeding policy so that the deficit which is there during the 24-hour stay, patient can be given that total amount. And slowly patient, as Harita rightly said, slowly we need to catch up. First day we cannot achieve what is the target. Slowly, maybe 3 days, then we can target 7 days. So accordingly, we need to increase the total intake to what is our target calorie protein, and accordingly we can achieve and give in the.
Thank you, Ipshita. It was a lovely strategy. Whilst we know that, we are dietitians, we are using nocturnal strategies, we are using night feeds. Now, considering that we are giving all these feeds, to you, Harita, I would ask you, whilst you did this pilot study, Did you use any other strategy of maybe routes? Have you used different other routes to feed your patients? Because today everybody is talking about achieving their calorie deficit, achieving a protein deficit. And once we just want to be aggressive to achieve our goals, is it any other route that we would like to look? Maybe an SPN or a TPN? What is the route you use for this study? And if you had to use any other routes, would you use those routes?
In a critical care unit, when we have calorie goals, we always want to achieve it by one route or the other. When we initiate feeding route administration, we always want to start with enteral, and that's, I think, has been a common factors with everybody. However, when enteral we are not able to achieve, that's when we will use supplemental parenteral nutrition. In this particular study, what we have seen is we initiated enteral with mild intolerances, yet we could continue feeding the patients enterally. There were volume restrictions, and we could overcome those restrictions. In this particular study, in these 30 patients, we've seen that when we had to reach our calorie goals, even though we had limitations of the volumes that were given to us, we were comfortable reaching the total calories goals. We did not need to use any kind of a total parenteral or supplemental parenting nutrition in this particular case.
Harita, I think you have followed the guidelines to the T as well, because the guideline says when the gut is working, use it. And you have used the gut to feed your patients, right? We use SPN or TPN when we cannot use the gut. So coming to using the gut, and therefore we have to understand that gut is a very sensitive organ. So coming to you, to ask a different question, maybe I'll ask this to Ritika. Ritika, talking about the electrolytes. So what is the kind of formulas that you use specifically when you need a low electrolyte formulation?
So, Eileen, yeah, it's very, very important because, generally as ICU dietitians, we only concentrate on the calories and the proteins for the patients. We somehow, completely forget about the electrolytes. Now, electrolyte imbalance is very, very common in the ICUs, and that will also depend, you as a dietitian will have to change your formulation because of that electrolyte imbalance. Now, where all do we get to see these electrolyte imbalance? I think most common, I think all of us know, is the AKIs, the acute kidney injuries which happen mostly in our ICU patients, and because of which there will be hyperphosphatemia or hyperkalemias. So that is one of the most common scenarios. But besides that, also we get to see a lot, especially when you have severely malnourished patients walking in, something which we know as refeeding syndrome. Remember, that's also a very, very important indicator, and you should look into, because there is a little electrolyte shift there happening too. Also, when we have fluid overload or there is fluid restrictions, because if there is fluid overload, that will obviously lead to more edema in the body. It can also strain the heart. So you have to be very, very careful and look into the electrolytes for such kind of patients. And last but not the least, because I specifically look after the neuro ICUs, I get to see a lot of sodium overload, and we have to restrict on the sodium, because if we are not able to do that, that also leads to a lot of water retention and actually leads to a brain, cerebral edema, which is very, very common. And that's where, we have to rethink about our formulations, what we are using, and probably look into something which, of course, are giving us our calories and proteins, but again, are very, very light on the electrolytes for sure.
Ritika, very well said. Whilst you take care of the electrolytes, you take care of hypernatremia and kalemia. There are some times when you also need modular nutrition. And, let us know in what conditions and what type of modular nutritions you use in your ICU.
So when we talk about the modular formulations, these are formulations which provide us with one particular single nutrient, and hence we should complement your polymeric or your calorie dense formulations. So we have various kinds of modular supplements which are now available. For example, we have some which are just protein focused, so something like your albumins and all, which are giving us just protein dense formulations. We also have for patients who have malabsorption, we can look into the MCT formulations, because these are your medium chain triglyceride, which actually help us to give us concentrated calories without the problems of indigestion or malabsorption. Also, we have fiber formulations which are now freely used, and these are not only used to probably control on the so-called, your normal gastrointestinal disturbances which people have, but also being used for better glycemic control. So there are these various kinds of formulations, and also I think we all as dietitians know it, that we have the glutamine and the arginine, which again have to be used. But remember that whenever we are talking about these modular supplements, they cannot be used in isolation. They have to be used in combination with your so-called aromatic or probably the calorie-dense formulations that we are talking about.
Excellent, excellent inputs by you, Ritika. And in fact, it's right that, you use modular nutrition where it is required. In fact, functional nutrition has really, really gone in leaps and bounds. And talking about functional nutrition, a very important aspect comes to my mind, Harita, especially in your case, which you did this pilot study. How did you manage the glycemic, load or the glycemic index of the feeds? How was your metabolic outcomes with relation to that?
While we feed the patient in the critically ill scenario, yes, the first line of concerns are about calories, proteins. And then, like Kritika said, secondly, we are really worried about the electrolytes, and we want to make sure that whatever feeds that we are giving do not disturb or escalate the electrolytes as well. Additionally, another thing that is going on in our minds is also to make sure that the carbohydrates that we are providing do not add to the hyperglycemia that already may be present, and we want to make sure that there is a even management of or a better management of glycemia through the feeds as well. We do not want to be in a scenario where one feed is giving very high calories or very high carbohydrate content, and the second subsequent feeds are giving very low calories, which will disturb the entire day's glycemia or the glycemic variability of the entire day. And therefore, the selection of the supplement should be such that while you give the calories, proteins, you're managing the electrolytes better, and you're not giving very hyper electrolyte feeds. We're also wanting to make sure that the glycemic index of the feeds is managed very well. This was definitely one of the goals that we had as well, and we could see that a random glucose of most of the patients was around 151 between 151 to 200, and it was well maintained throughout the study. So that is something that I'm happy about, because you want to manage many things which the feed impacts. You want to look at electrolytes, you want to look at glycemia, you want to look at the albumin status, you want to make sure the creatinine values are well maintained. And when these biochemical parameters are all well maintained throughout the stay in the ICU, you know that your nutrition is working well. It is helping the patient in the way it is supposed to help, and we are reaching our nutritional goals very well as well.
Very well said, Harita. Ipshita, I have a question for you. In your practice, what strategies you use for volume-based feeding?
Yes, Eileen, it's a very relevant question, I can say, because volume based feeding is the only solution for catching up or replacing whatever is the interruption phase. Because in ICU, as we all know, because of somehow or other something is going on, some tracheostomy, some CT, which I have already discussed in my previous discussion also. So we need to compensate the deficit part. Here, this calorie dense formula plays a very, very important role, because in a lesser volume, we can give a higher amount of protein and calorie. But in few cases who are really volume restricted, there we need to talk to the consultant or an ICU registrar or an intensivist, just if possible, because fluid part we cannot take a call. Doctors have to take the call, and they can only decide on the fluid part. So if some amount of fluid can be increased for that particular patient, so that we can use little bit of extra supplement can be given, and that patient, because apparently we can see that that patient is in a requirement of high protein and high calorie, which cannot be met properly with that much of minimal volume. So in consultation, because our practice is a multidisciplinary team approach, what we always discuss. So it has to be some intensivists call, so that they can share the amount, if at all the fluid can be increased. So we can little bit, add little bit of supplement, and we can increase the calorie and the protein, and that way we can compensate the requirement which is being lost during the interruptions for a 24 hours stay in the ICU, because we cannot lose out on nutrition, as almost all ICU patients are malnourished. So we need to look into the factor.
Ipshita, why as we, talked about feeding the patients in the ICU. Now you have this patient get out of the ICU and the patient is trying to have normal nutrition outside the ICU whilst they are going home and whilst they are recuperating. I would like to ask you some challenges that you face, maybe taste-wise, taste of the ONS, or what challenges you face with your patients who are out of the ICU and trying to eat normally now.
Basically, while a patient is getting discharged, maybe directly from ICU, maybe from ward, we have to prescribe a supplement for the deficit, the debt a particular patient is having on a regular or through oral intake. So for that, we need to focus on two basic things, what we do in our practice. One is the taste of the product, because patient has lost all the taste, so it has to be tasty, otherwise compliance will be very, very poor. And at the same time, we need to look into the financial viability of the patient. We have to prescribe such a product which a patient will buy and continue. If it is a very expensive product, maybe patient will have one container, one tin, and after that they will stop. So it cannot continue like that. A patient has to have that kind of nutrition for few months on end, so that we can have, at least after 3 months, we can have a again reconsultation, I can say, in the OPD, like weight gain, the taste improvement, better blood workups. So these all we need to consider, and we can see and prescribe, and a fresh dietary advice can be given accordingly.
Thank you, Ipshita. One last question to you is, we know that the role of dietitian is extremely important. But in the ICU setup, how do you think dietitians play a role in the medical nutrition and in their therapies?
100%, it has to be the clinical dietitian only who can take the call. Doctor can advise the fluid. We have to go through the, basically we need to do the screening and assessment. That is our first thing which we do in all ICU setups, and the patient who is landing up in ICU. So we need to screen the patient, we need to assess the patient, then only we can start thinking about the type of nutrition the management of that particular patient. So the fluid part and when to start, these all our doctor can say. So we as clinical dietitians, it's our responsibility, is our prerogative. We can decide on the product, what is to be given to the patient, and how it can be given to the patient. So in my belief, in my practice, it has to be a dietitian's initiative for a better outcome of the patient, because in almost all of us are working in corporate hospitals, so where average length of stay matters. Specifically, a person cannot be kept in ICU for a longer period. So patient has to be fed in such a way so that his or her ICU stay goes down, and patient can be shifted to ward or HDU, or patient can be sent back home well.
Yes, Ipshita. In fact, what you said is absolutely correct and true. Whilst the role of dietitian is important, I would like Harita to summarize the high Cal Pro ICU pilot study for us and what really are the outcomes of the study.
If I have to summarize the ICU CalPro study, There are many outcomes that we can, look at. One is, yes, we have been able to start early, gradually go up the calorie and the protein requirement and reach it by day 6, day 10. If there is whether there is a difference between the planned calories and the achieved calories, we see that we have achieved about 86-85% of the planned intervention that we wanted to do. Additionally, we also looked at whether the patients tolerated these high calorie, high protein supplements that we give, while about 53% of them had different issues of either constipation, diarrhea, or bloating. By and large, we saw that they could tolerate it over a long period of time, which helped us. So, if you look at one of the goals is achieving their nutritional interventions goals, and about 80-85% of the goals were achieved during the entire ICU stay. We also wanted to see whether tolerance was an issue. Tolerance definitely was not an issue. We also wanted to see whether their electrolyte management was good, whether their nutritional parameters in terms of albumin, prealbumin, in terms of creatinine, whether they were deranged because of the feed that were given to the patient, and that they were also well maintained throughout the study. Another area that we looked at is why we give these high calorie supplements. We also know that the carbohydrate intakes are going to be high and whether this will impact the glycemia. And we saw that the glycemia was stable during the entire stay of the ICU, and this did not worry us much. So while we are giving the overall nutritional care to the patient, we looked at all the parameters, we could see that we are able to maintain all the other aspects which are very critical in our ICU, make sure that the nutritional status does not deteriorate during their stay in the ICU, and the patient's outcomes, both in terms of hand grip, in terms of MUSE, and in terms of cuff circumference, were slightly improved as well. So, while so one of the major conclusions can also be that if the ICU nutrition is well monitored, if it is planned by a clinical dietitian and it is monitored on a day-to-day basis, patients come out of the ICU very well. Their nutritional status does not deteriorate. And when they come out, maybe into the ward and out of the ICU, their nutritional status is well maintained, and therefore length of stay both in the ICU as well as in the hospital can be minimized by effective medical nutrition therapy.
So, whilst we end this podcast, I would really like to congratulate Harita for successfully doing this pilot study and showing us that the outcome of a good nutrition program is positive. So, whilst we end this, I wish Harita to take the study to many more places and let us do it as a multi-centric, many center studies. Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. Thank you, Harita. Thank you, Ivshita. And thank you, Ritika, for being there and creating this lovely moment.
Thank you.